Now I would like to talk a bit about concepts, how to develop good, consistent, coherent concepts, and how to construct measures. Ideally, my position is that concepts should determine the construction of measures. That is, that how a measure is built, which are its components, how is it measured, how are the scores, the values of the different indicators aggregated into one composite measure. This should be should depend on the concept, should also be justified and legitimized by a concept. But often people work the other way around. If they find interesting measures, they then use the measure in a way to shape the concept. In practice, particularly scholars interested in taking a positivist empirical approach tend to neglect the importance of concepts, in my experience at least. The key criterion for measurement is, of course, validity. To what extent do the indicators, do the phenomena that we observe, that we measure, match what we want to measure? Validity is different from truth. Truth is a question that is important for perhaps philosophical debates. Here we have a much more limited horizon. We are just interested in to what extent one can consider a measure as valid, providing valid information on a presence or the absence of a concept. There are three parts of this second section. One is on concept, the second on measurement, the third on aggregation. And I will also go into some technical details. So that may be redundant and repeating for those who have enjoyed econometric and economists training sometime in their study periods. But since this is not the case for everybody here, I think I have to say something about some.
For none of us here.
Yeah, I talked to one lady.
There is? Okay.
Who has experience with this. Okay, now, of course, to develop a concept, say, conceptualize what is democracy, for example, the first challenge is which attributes, which components, defining features to identify. Here, in a way, there are two risks. One is you have a too maximalist definition of a concept. That is, for example, you would argue that democracy is free elections, rule of law, responsive government, social rights that enable citizens to participate in democracy, and regular, effective parliamentary accountability. These are all important components of democracy. Let's develop a full-fledged, a complex definition of democracy. The question is then, to what extent, if I use such a maximalist definition, can I apply my definitions to different realities in different countries, different cultures? And the other problem that comes with such complex conceptualizations is sometimes I'm interested in certain causal relations that I can no longer test because they are integrated into the concept. If I include social rights as part of my definition, my ambitious definition of democracy, then it is not possible to look at degrees of democracy in countries where social rights are better guaranteed or less guaranteed, where there's more social inequality, for example, or illiteracy or such things. That would not be possible if I use such a complex definition to look at such effects of democracy and relationships with democracy. The other risk is taking a too minimalist definition. For example, if I would say democracy, the key, the core is simply elections. That there is a choice of politicians and they are elected by the citizens. Yeah? And that's it. No other criteria, no other attributes necessary. Then perhaps my concept would be insufficiently able to discriminate between different types of democracy. I would have Switzerland on the same side as, say, countries that hold regular elections, and also consider themselves democracy, but where many people have doubts about to what extent they are democracy. They would fall under my minimalist definition of democracy in this case. Then ideally, within a concept, I would have to structure my attributes according to descending levels of abstraction. That is, the more abstract attributes comprise the less abstract ones, and then finally, I have very concrete, very specific indicators that I can use to measure the presence of my concept. There it is important, if I order my attributes in this way, it is important to avoid overlap between attributes on the same level, and at the same time also to make sure that the lower level attributes are more specific than the higher level attribute, that there's no conflation. The classical approach to conceptualization has been forming subtypes. For example, to distinguish between different democracies by labeling one type of democracy as parliamentary democracy and another one presidential democracy. Parliamentary democracy obviously is in political science, it's defined as the accountability of the government to the parliament. This is given. And presidential democracy would be that there is no accountability of the government to the parliament, but rather we have two branches of power. We have an executive that is separately elected and a legislature separately elected. Now, the problem with this differentiation is that, that is typically involved with differentiation, such differentiation is that it may extend the concept to subject areas that are beyond the initial scope of the concept. And this has been criticized or identified as so-called stretching. Yeah? This means over expanding a concept by Giovanni Sartori initially. The question is then to what extent one can, for example, apply the concept of democracy to countries that call themselves democracies but perhaps do not meet the criteria of democracy. The strategy to avoid stretching is generalization, but this, of course, so do not use democracy, but rather regime. That would be the next higher level of abstraction, a political regime. Yeah? Regime in political science, it's a neutral term. Yeah? It's often in public language used as a negative term, but in political science it simply means very abstractly, a set of rules and procedures and institutions. Yeah? Just this. And a political regime is, of course, referring to the exercise of political rule. It's not necessary, not negatively meant initially, yeah? Or generically. The problem, of course, with moving to a higher level of abstraction, you lose the power to differentiate. The concept may become too general. One strategy that has been suggested to deal with this problem of either too general concept or overstretched specific concept is introducing so-called reduced subtypes. That is, for example, the term illiberal democracy. If we define democracy not just as elections, but also as granting the civil rights necessary to make use of one's right to vote, plus the accountability of elected political leaders to a legislature, to a constitutional court, if we would say that these two elements, accountability and civil rights, are also part of democracy, then we could argue that reduced subtypes, that they have present two of these attributes, for example, such as there is some sort of accountability of a president vis-à-vis a parliament, and there is, of course, the right to vote. There are elections, so in that sense we can talk about a democracy, but we don't have this third attribute of civil rights. Yeah? They are severely constrained. Therefore, we can call what we find there illiberal democracy, with a lack of guaranteed civil rights. Of course, for example, think of Mexico or so, criminal networks killing students who were trying to make use of their civil rights, and also trying to support opposition parties.